The crystal trophy gleamed under the spotlights as Robert Mitchell, CEO of Technovision Industries, raised it above his head like a conquering hero. The thunderous applause that erupted throughout the grand ballroom of the Marriott downtown felt like nails scraping against my soul. I sat frozen at table 37, tucked away in the shadows where they'd placed all the support staff, watching this man, 23 years my junior, bask in glory that belonged to me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert's voice boomed through the sound system, his Harvard MBA confidence radiating across the room. The Genesis AI platform has transformed not only Technovision Industries, but revolutionized how financial institutions approach predictive analytics. From near bankruptcy to a $600 million valuation in just 14 months. This is what true innovation looks like. Your innovation, the words stuck in my throat like broken glass. Your 3 years of 18-hour days, your sleepless nights debugging algorithms while he was networking at country clubs. At 63, I should have been the one up there. Gabriella Chen, the architect of Genesis AI, the woman who'd spent her entire career fighting to be taken seriously in Silicon Valley's boys' club. Instead, I sat clutching my untouched champagne flute, my knuckles white against the stem, watching this theatrical performance of my professional assassination. "Gabriella, dear, you really should smile," whispered Sandra Williams, our HR director, her voice dripping with false concern. "People are starting to notice your expression." I forced my weathered features into something resembling contentment, the same mask I'd worn for 37 years in this industry, the same mask that had gotten me through countless meetings where my ideas were dismissed until a younger male colleague repeated them, the same mask that had carried me through promotion after promotion, being passed over for men half my age with half my experience. The rest of the evening blurred into a nauseating carousel of congratulations and networking small talk. Industry leaders who'd never spoken to me before suddenly appeared at my table, eager to shake hands with the team behind Genesis AI. Not one of them asked about my specific contributions. To them, I was simply another gray-haired woman in a navy dress suit, part of the anonymous army of worker bees who made the magic happen while the young executives took the stage. I bided my time, nursing my anger like a fine wine, waiting for the crowd to thin and the alcohol to work its loosening magic on Robert's already oversized ego. I found him just before midnight in the hotel's mahogany-paneled bar, celebrating with 3 board members, his tie askew and his cheeks flushed with champagne and self-congratulation. "Robert," I approached with the measured steps, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside my chest. "Might I have a word, privately?" He turned, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, the same expression he'd worn in every meeting where he'd dismissed my concerns or spoken over my presentations. "Gabriella, my star programmer." Of course. He excused himself from the group with theatrical flourish, following me to a quiet corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "You know exactly what you did tonight," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Genesis AI is my creation. Every neural network, every predictive algorithm, every line of code. That's 3 years of my life you claimed as your own up there." Robert's laugh came sharp and bitter, like champagne gone flat. "Gabriella, Gabriella, Gabriella." He shook his head with mock sympathy. "You were adequately compensated for your time, weren't you? You cashed every paycheck, didn't you? I was promised recognition, partnership, a seat at the leadership table." My hands trembled, but not from fear, from pure, undiluted rage that had been building for months. That $500,000 bonus you just accepted, we both know who earned every penny. Something darker flickered across Robert's face. The jovial mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crumpled $50 bill, and pressed it into my palm with enough force to make his point crystal clear. "There," he whispered, his breath hot with champagne and contempt. "That's your true worth. A replaceable cog in the machine. Know your place, Margaret. Women your age should be grateful to even have a position in this industry. The future belongs to fresh minds, not." He gestured dismissively at my silver hair, my laugh lines, my 63 years of accumulated wisdom, not relics from a bygone era. Each word hit like a physical blow, replaceable, old, relic. The decades I'd spent fighting for respect in conference rooms dominated by men young enough to be my sons, the nights I'd worked while they slept, the weekends I'd sacrificed while they played golf, the innovative solutions I'd developed while they took credit, all reduced to this crumpled piece of paper in my palm. "You won't get away with this," I managed, my voice barely audible above the hotel's ambient jazz music. Robert's laughter cut through me again. "I already have." "What are you going to do? Sue me?" "The intellectual property belongs to Technovision. You signed those papers the day you joined. And who would believe you anyway? The bitter old woman who couldn't keep up with innovation." He patted my shoulder with condescending familiarity. "Enjoy your remaining time with us. Your retirement party is what? 6 months away. I'm sure we can find someone younger, faster, and considerably more cost-effective to maintain your little program." As he walked away, swagger intact, I stood there staring at the $50 bill. My reflection in the darkened window showed a woman I barely recognized, tired, angry, but somehow more resolved than I'd felt in years. The same face that had once graced the cover of Tech Innovator magazine as one of 10 women changing Silicon Valley, now looked back at me with steel in her eyes. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the screen's glow illuminating my tear-streaked cheeks as I planned my response. Genesis AI wasn't just software. It was an intricate ecosystem of interdependent algorithms, with hidden safeguards and fail-safes that only I fully understood. Robert had claimed my code. Yes, but he didn't truly comprehend it. That would be his downfall. By dawn, I had formulated my plan. That crumpled $50 bill sat beside my coffee cup, no longer a symbol of my insignificance, but the first page of my comeback story. Robert Mitchell was about to learn that in the world of code, the person who writes the rules holds the real power, and I had written every single one. The next morning, I dressed with the deliberate precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. My navy blue Armani suit, the same one I'd worn to my first interview at Technovision 15 years ago, hung perfectly on my frame. My silver hair was swept back into an elegant chignon, and my makeup was minimal but flawless. I looked every inch the seasoned executive I'd always been, not the relic Robert had dismissed me as. The office building hummed with its usual morning energy as I arrived at 6:30 a.m., a full hour before even the most ambitious junior developers typically showed up. My security badge, which Robert, in his arrogance, had forgotten to restrict, granted me access to the server rooms and development repositories. After all, why would he worry about the harmless old woman who was supposedly too grateful for her job to cause trouble? I settled into my workstation and opened the Genesis AI core system. To anyone glancing over, I appeared to be conducting routine maintenance, updating security patches, optimizing database queries, the mundane tasks that kept our revolutionary platform running smoothly. In reality, I was orchestrating something far more sophisticated. Genesis AI wasn't just software, it was my digital masterpiece. An intricate ecosystem of interdependent algorithms with hidden safeguards and fail-safes that only I truly understood. Robert had claimed ownership of my code, yes, but he'd never bothered to comprehend its deeper architecture. He saw only the surface, the impressive user interface, the sleek reports, the profit margins. He had no idea about the elegant redundancies I'd built in, the diagnostic protocols that could trace every transaction, every decision, every computational pathway back to its source. For the next 3 hours, I worked with the focused intensity that had made me legendary among my peers. I wasn't destroying anything. I would never jeopardize the clients who depended on our services or the employees whose livelihoods hung in the balance. Instead, I was simply adjusting things, reminding the system who its true creator was. The beauty of my plan lay in its subtlety. Genesis AI would continue functioning perfectly for all legitimate operations, but certain administrative functions would begin displaying my digital signature instead of Robert's. Client dashboards would start showing my name as the system architect. Financial reports would include metadata highlighting my contributions. Most importantly, the presentation Robert had given at last night's award ceremony would begin playing on a loop throughout the office, but with subtle modifications that exposed the glaring technical inaccuracies in his explanations. When Robert strode into the office at 9:30 a.m., still wearing yesterday's expensive cologne and probably nursing a champagne headache, I was waiting calmly in his glass-walled corner office. I'd positioned myself in one of the leather visitor chairs facing his mahogany desk, my hands folded serenely in my lap. Gabriella, his confusion was genuine, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. "What are you doing here? How did you get into my office?" I smiled, a serene, almost maternal expression that seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "Good morning, Robert. I came to give you something." I placed a small USB drive on his pristine desk, its silver surface catching the morning light streaming through his floor-to-ceiling windows. He picked it up, turning it over in his manicured hands like it might explode. "What's this supposed to be?" "And a warning," I replied simply, my voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd spent 4 decades earning her stripes in Silicon Valley. "You might want to check the Genesis AI primary servers. It seems there's been an irregularity in this morning's processing cycles." As if choreographed by fate itself, his iPhone began buzzing insistently on the desk. The name David Park, CTO, flashed on the screen, and I watched the color drain from Robert's face as comprehension began to dawn. "What did you do?" he hissed, fear replacing the condescension from the previous night. I stood up gracefully, smoothing the front of my jacket with practiced elegance. I simply reminded the system who its real creator is. I paused at his office door, savoring this moment I'd dreamed about for months. "Oh, and Robert, you might want to hold on to that $50 you gave me last night. Something tells me you're going to need it more than I will." The sound of panic in his voice as he frantically answered his still ringing phone was the sweetest symphony I'd heard in years. But this was just the overture. The real performance was about to begin. By 10:30 a.m., Technovision Industries was in complete disarray. From my cubicle, the same modest workspace I'd occupied for 15 years while watching less qualified men get promoted around me, I observed the chaos unfolding with scientific detachment. IT personnel rushed past my desk, their faces tight with confusion and stress. The Genesis AI system hadn't crashed. I would never put our clients' financial data at risk, but it had certainly begun behaving in ways that demanded immediate attention. Sandra Williams from HR appeared at my desk, her usual corporate composure noticeably shaken. "Gabriella, Robert needs to see you immediately in the main conference room." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "What's happening? The entire executive floor is in absolute chaos." I saved my work and stood up calmly, gathering my tablet and coffee mug with unhurried precision. "I imagine Robert is having some difficulty understanding his own award-winning software," I replied, injecting just enough steel into my voice to make Sandra's eyes widen slightly. In our 15 years of working together, she'd never heard that particular edge in my tone. For too long, I'd been the accommodating team player, the reliable workhorse who absorbed criticism gracefully and never rocked the boat. That version of Gabriella Chen had died last night, along with my illusions about corporate loyalty and fair play. The executive floor was indeed in chaos when I arrived. Technicians huddled around monitors, displaying error messages and anomalous data streams. Board members spoke in hushed, urgent tones into their phones, trying to reassure nervous investors. And in the center of it all stood Robert, his perfectly styled hair disheveled, his $1,000 shirt wrinkled, looking like a man watching his carefully constructed empire crumble in real time. "Fix it," he demanded the moment I entered the glass-walled conference room. "Whatever you did, undo it now." I set my tablet down on the polished mahogany conference table and took a seat with deliberate calm. "I'm afraid you'll need to be more specific, Robert. What seems to be the problem with your revolutionary software?" His eyes narrowed at my emphasis on the word, your. "Don't play games with me, Gabriella. The system is redirecting data streams, changing performance metrics, displaying incorrect attribution information. It's making us look incompetent in front of our biggest clients." "Interesting," I mused, opening my tablet and pretending to review some notes. "And how do you know I had anything to do with these irregularities?" "Because only the architect of the system could manipulate it at this level without bringing it down entirely," interjected David Park, our chief technology officer. Unlike Robert, David had always respected my expertise, even if he'd never fought hard enough to ensure I received proper recognition. His voice carried a mixture of professional admiration and growing concern. I smiled at David warmly. "That's a compelling theory, David. But as Robert made quite clear last night, he is the visionary behind Genesis AI. Surely he can resolve any technical issues that arise." The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of air conditioning and the muffled sounds of crisis management from the hallway. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, beginning to sense the undercurrents of this confrontation. "What exactly do you want, Gabriella?" Robert finally asked, his voice dropping to the dangerous whisper I'd heard him use with subordinates who'd displeased him. I counted off each demand on my fingers with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. Recognition as the true creator of Genesis AI, appropriate compensation for my contributions, including a partnership stake in the company, and half of that $500,000 bonus you accepted last night, the one we both know I earned through 3 years of 18-hour days and sleepless nights. Robert's laugh was hollow, desperate. "You're holding the entire company hostage over your wounded ego. This is corporate terrorism, pure and simple." "No, Robert," I replied with calm conviction. "This is a negotiation, and unlike last night's humiliation, this time we're having it on equal terms." I opened my tablet and turned it to face the room, displaying a comprehensive timeline of Genesis AI's development. Every email I'd sent, every code commit I'd made, every breakthrough I'd achieved, 3 years of irrefutable digital evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I'm not asking for anything that wasn't rightfully mine to begin with, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I built this system from the ground up while Robert was playing golf with investors and taking credit for innovations he couldn't even pronounce correctly. David stepped closer to examine the evidence, his expression growing more troubled with each screen he reviewed. "She's right," he said quietly, his words carrying the weight of professional integrity. "This is all Gabriella's work. Every major breakthrough, every critical algorithm, it all traces back to her." "It doesn't matter," Robert snapped, his composure finally cracking completely. "She signed an employment contract. The intellectual property belongs to Technovision, regardless of who actually created it." "True," I conceded with a slight nod, "but there's a profound difference between legal ownership and public perception. How do you think our clients and shareholders will react when they learn the truth, that their trusted CEO isn't the brilliant innovator they believed, but rather a man who built his reputation on the stolen work of the replaceable old woman he publicly humiliated?" I could see the calculations happening behind Robert's eyes. His reputation, his future career prospects, his carefully cultivated image as a tech industry visionary, all balanced precariously on the edge of exposure. "You have 24 hours to decide," I announced, standing and gathering my tablet. "Until then, Genesis AI will continue to express its dissatisfaction with the current management structure." As I walked toward the conference room door, Robert stepped into my path, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and desperation. "You won't get away with this. Gabriella, I'll have security escort you out, revoke all your access privileges, report you to the authorities for sabotage." I met his gaze steadily, feeling more powerful and in control than I had in years. "Go ahead, Robert. But remember, I built safeguards into the system that you don't even know exist. Removing me from the equation won't solve your problem. It will only make it infinitely worse." With that, I walked out of the conference room with my head held high, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed in my wake. For the first time in decades, I felt like the architect of my own destiny, rather than a victim of other people's ambitions. The war had begun, and I held all the cards. I had barely settled back into my cubicle when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The words on the screen made my blood run cold. "I know what Robert did to you. I have proof that goes beyond what you've shown today. Meet me at Central Park, north entrance near the reservoir, 8:00 p.m. Come alone. This isn't just about stolen credit. It's bigger than you know." My hands trembled slightly as I read the message twice, then 3 times. Who else knew about Robert's betrayal? What proof could they possibly have that I hadn't already documented? And what did they mean by bigger than you know? I glanced toward Robert's office, where I could see him through the glass walls, gesticulating frantically into his phone, no doubt trying to contain the damage from this morning's irregularities. His usually perfect composure had cracked completely, revealing the desperate man beneath the polished executive veneer. But if this mysterious contact was right, perhaps Robert's theft of my work was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. The afternoon dragged by with excruciating slowness. I maintained my professional facade, responding to routine emails and pretending to work on system documentation, but my mind kept returning to that cryptic message. By 5:30 p.m., I could no longer concentrate. I gathered my belongings and headed home to prepare for what might be the most important meeting of my career, or the most dangerous. Central Park, in October, held a melancholy beauty that matched my mood perfectly. The autumn leaves crunched beneath my feet as I made my way to the reservoir, their gold and crimson colors muted in the gathering dusk. I'd taken precautions, of course, forwarding the mysterious text to my personal email account and leaving a sealed envelope with my neighbor containing a backup of all my evidence, along with instructions to contact a technology journalist I trusted if I didn't return home by midnight. After 37 years in Silicon Valley, I'd learned that naivete could be fatal, especially when challenging someone as powerful and ruthless as Robert Mitchell. At precisely 8:00 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows near a cluster of oak trees. As she approached, I recognized the petite frame and determined stride of Patricia Wong, Technovision's chief financial officer. My surprise must have been written clearly across my face. "Thank you for coming, Gabriella," Patricia said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper despite the relative privacy of our location. She glanced nervously over her shoulder before continuing. "We don't have much time. Patricia, you sent that text." I studied her face in the lamplight, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the stress lines that seemed to have appeared overnight. "What's this about?" She handed me a thick manila envelope, her hands shaking slightly. "These are financial records from the past 18 months. Look closely at the investment patterns, the fund allocations, the timing of certain transactions, especially those that occurred just before and after Genesis AI's major milestones." I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents, scanning them quickly under the pale glow of a nearby streetlight. Even with my limited financial expertise, the irregularities jumped off the pages like red flags. "My God," I murmured, pieces of a horrifying puzzle beginning to fall into place. "He's been using Genesis AI to manipulate investments." Patricia nodded grimly. "Robert knew your system would succeed because he'd seen your prototypes, watched your progress reports. So he positioned his personal investment portfolio accordingly, then used company resources and Genesis AI's predictive capabilities to maximize his returns. It's textbook securities fraud, but nearly impossible to prove without understanding exactly how Genesis AI processes financial data." I continued examining the documents, my horror growing with each page. Transaction logs showed suspicious patterns, large fund movements that coincided perfectly with Genesis AI's deployment phases, investment decisions that seemed to anticipate market changes with impossible accuracy. "This goes far beyond taking credit for my work," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger. "He's been using my algorithms to commit financial crimes." Yes, and there's worse news," Patricia added, her voice dropping even lower. "He's been careful to implicate you in the process. Your digital signature is embedded in the code that facilitates these transactions. If this ever comes to light and needs a scapegoat, you'd be the perfect target. The disgruntled employee who embedded fraudulent functions into the company's core product." The full scope of Robert's betrayal hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't enough for him to steal my life's work and humiliate me publicly. He'd also set me up to take the fall for his crimes, positioning me as the perfect patsy, an older woman who could be easily dismissed and discredited. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, studying Patricia's face carefully. "Why take such an enormous risk?" She looked away briefly, and when she met my eyes again, I saw pain there that went deeper than professional concern. My older sister went through something similar at her company 3 years ago. Brilliant software engineer, 28 years of service, consistently passed over for promotions in favor of younger men with half her experience. When she finally spoke up about age and gender discrimination, they found ways to push her out. She never recovered professionally or personally. Patricia's voice grew stronger, more determined. I won't be complicit in watching the same thing happen to another brilliant woman. I've seen your code. Gabriella, I know what you've accomplished. What Robert is doing to you and to this company is unconscionable. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness behind us, and we both tensed. Patricia glanced at her watch nervously. I have to go, but there's something else you need to know. This conspiracy involves other board members. Not all of them, but enough to make your situation extremely dangerous. Which ones? I asked urgently. The investment committee members who had access to early Genesis AI data. Robert's been sharing insider information with them in exchange for their support in executive decisions. They've all profited significantly from advanced knowledge of your system's capabilities. She started to turn away, then paused. Be very careful, Gabriella. Robert has more allies than you realize, and they have a lot to lose if this comes out. Document everything. Trust no one completely. And remember, they'll try to paint you as an unstable older employee seeking revenge. With that, Patricia disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone with evidence that transformed my personal betrayal into something far more sinister. As I walked back through the park, the weight of the manila envelope felt like it contained enough explosive material to bring down not just Robert, but potentially the entire company. Back in my apartment, I spread the documents across my dining table and began the painstaking process of cross-referencing them with my knowledge of Genesis AI's architecture. The pattern that emerged was both ingenious and horrifying. Robert had identified vulnerabilities in my system that even I hadn't fully anticipated, exploiting them to create what amounted to a sophisticated money laundering operation disguised as legitimate investment management. By manipulating Genesis AI's predictive algorithms and feeding selective data to certain board members, he'd created a closed loop of insider trading that generated millions in illegal profits while appearing completely above board to outside observers. The beauty of the scheme lay in its technical complexity. Only someone with intimate knowledge of both the software architecture and the financial applications could trace the fraudulent pathways. As dawn approached, I realized that my situation had become exponentially more dangerous overnight. I wasn't just fighting for professional recognition anymore. I was sitting on evidence of a criminal conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Technovision's leadership. If Robert and his co-conspirators discovered what I knew, they wouldn't hesitate to destroy me completely to protect themselves. But I also realized something else. I now held the key to bringing down the entire corrupt system. My deep understanding of Genesis AI's architecture, combined with Patricia's financial documentation, created an unbreakable chain of evidence. Robert had made a fatal error in underestimating both my technical capabilities and my determination to seek justice. The question was no longer whether I could prove Robert's crimes, but whether I could expose them before he and his allies found a way to silence me permanently. The 24-hour deadline I'd given him suddenly seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. It was time to accelerate my timeline and strike before they could strike first. My phone rang at 6:30 a.m., jolting me from the 3 hours of restless sleep I'd managed after documenting Patricia's evidence. The caller ID showed Elizabeth Harrison, Technovision's board chairwoman, a formidable woman in her late 50s who'd built her reputation on unflinching integrity and sharp business acumen. Gabriella, we need to talk. Elizabeth's voice was crisp and businesslike, but I detected an undercurrent of tension. Not at the office, the Riverside Cafe on Fifth Avenue, 1 hour. "I'll be there," I replied, my mind immediately racing through the implications. If Elizabeth was reaching out directly, it meant the situation had escalated beyond Robert's ability to contain it through normal corporate channels. The Riverside Cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, its morning regulars having already departed for their offices. Elizabeth sat in a secluded corner booth, an untouched cup of coffee growing cold in front of her. She looked like she'd had as little sleep as I had, her usually immaculate silver hair slightly disheveled and her designer suit wrinkled as if she'd slept in it. "The board held an emergency meeting last night," she began without preamble as I slid into the booth across from her. "Robert convinced most of them that you're engaged in corporate sabotage and industrial espionage. He's painting you as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge." And I studied her face carefully, trying to read her true intentions. And what do you think, Elizabeth? She leaned back in her seat, her steel gray eyes never leaving mine. "I think a woman doesn't spend 15 years building a company's technological infrastructure only to sabotage it over a matter of professional recognition. I think there's considerably more to this story than Robert wants us to believe." Elizabeth paused, choosing her words carefully. "I also think Robert has been unusually eager to handle all financial reporting and board communications himself these past several months. For a CEO who used to delegate everything, that level of micromanagement raises questions." I made a calculated decision. If I was going to survive this conspiracy, I needed powerful allies, and Elizabeth Harrison's reputation for ethical leadership made her my best hope. If I told you that Robert was using Genesis AI to commit securities fraud, would you believe me? If she was surprised by my directness, Elizabeth didn't show it. I would need to see concrete evidence, and if that evidence implicated other board members, a flicker of something, anger, perhaps, or determination, crossed her features. Then I would need to know exactly who and how extensively they're involved. I slid Patricia's manila envelope across the table. It's all documented in there. Investment patterns, fund allocations, transaction timing, everything that proves Robert has been using my algorithms to manipulate markets and enrich himself and select board members. Elizabeth didn't open the envelope immediately. Instead, she continued studying my face with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades evaluating business proposals and personnel decisions. "What do you want from me?" "Gabriella, what's your end game here?" "What I've always wanted," I replied honestly. "Recognition for my work, a seat at the leadership table where my contributions can be properly valued, and protection from being scapegoated for Robert's crimes." I leaned forward, letting my passion show through my professional composure. "But more than that, I want Technovision to survive this crisis. There are 400 employees whose livelihoods depend on this company. I didn't spend 3 years creating Genesis AI just to be the one who destroys it." Elizabeth nodded slowly, finally taking the envelope. "You understand that exposing financial fraud of this magnitude could destroy the company regardless of our intentions. Once the Securities and Exchange Commission gets involved, there's no controlling the narrative or limiting the damage." "I do understand that," I assured her. "But there's a solution embedded within the problem itself. Genesis AI can be recalibrated to identify and correct the fraudulent transactions, creating a clear record that distinguishes between legitimate operations and Robert's manipulations. It would demonstrate the company's commitment to transparency while protecting our clients and shareholders." For the first time since I'd arrived, Elizabeth's expression showed genuine interest. You can do that without alerting Robert or the compromised board members to what we're planning. Give me 48 hours of unrestricted system access, I said confidently. I can make it appear to be a routine security upgrade while actually documenting every illegal transaction and building an ironclad case for the authorities. Elizabeth extended her hand across the table. We have an agreement, Gabriella, but proceed with extreme caution. If Robert suspects what we're doing, he won't hesitate to destroy you professionally and personally to protect himself. As we shook hands, my phone buzzed with an urgent text message from Emma Rodriguez, a 28-year-old programmer on my team. My heart sank as I read her words. Gabriella, something's very wrong. Robert called an emergency tech meeting with external security consultants. They're discussing neutralizing system vulnerabilities, and your name keeps coming up. I think you're in serious danger. I showed the message to Elizabeth, whose expression hardened with resolve. Go home immediately and don't access any company systems from your personal devices, she ordered. I'll handle this situation through proper channels. How? I asked, suddenly realizing how vulnerable I truly was. Robert had corporate resources, a security team, and apparently now external consultants at his disposal. Because while Robert was busy collecting allies among the board members through bribery and fraud, Elizabeth said, gathering her belongings with determined efficiency, I was building relationships with federal regulators who owe me considerable professional favors. Trust me, Gabriella, this ends today. As we prepared to leave the cafe, a black Lincoln Navigator with heavily tinted windows pulled up across the street. The driver's window lowered just enough for me to glimpse a familiar face, David Park, our chief technology officer, gesturing frantically for me to approach. Gabriella, he called out urgently, get in now. They're coming for you. Robert knows about your meeting with Patricia last night. Elizabeth and I exchanged worried glances. Can you trust him? She asked quietly. I'm not sure I can trust anyone completely at this point, I replied truthfully, my mind racing through the possibilities. David had always respected my technical expertise, but his loyalties during corporate conflicts remained untested. David called out again, more desperately this time. Gabriella, we don't have much time. There's a team of corporate security specialists heading to your apartment right now. They have legal authority to confiscate your personal computers and devices under the pretense of protecting company intellectual property. The sound of screeching tires around the corner made the decision for me. A second black vehicle was approaching rapidly, and through its windshield, I could see Robert himself in the passenger seat. His face contorted with rage and determination. Go with David, Elizabeth urged, pushing me toward the Navigator. I'll contact my SEC connections immediately and ensure they have all the evidence they need. Remember, 48 hours to complete the system recalibration. I'll create the political cover you need to finish this. I rushed to David's vehicle and jumped in, my heart pounding as we pulled away from the curb. Through the rear window, I caught a glimpse of Robert's vehicle stopping at the cafe, but we were already disappearing into the morning traffic. Where are we going? I asked David as he navigated through the city with practiced precision, taking a circuitous route that suggested familiarity with surveillance evasion. Somewhere Robert can't track us, he replied grimly. My sister's apartment in Brooklyn. She's traveling abroad for work, and Robert doesn't know the location exists. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror. You need to understand, Gabriella, this has gone far beyond corporate politics. Robert isn't just trying to discredit you anymore. He's trying to have you arrested on fabricated charges of corporate espionage and system sabotage. As we crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan skyline receding behind us, I clutched my tablet containing the backup of Patricia's evidence and my own documentation. The game had indeed changed dramatically. This was no longer about professional recognition or even financial justice. It had become a race for survival, both mine and potentially Technovision's. I had 48 hours to expose a criminal conspiracy, save my career, and protect the company I'd helped build. The clock was ticking, and Robert Mitchell was no longer just a plagiarizing executive. He was a cornered criminal who would stop at nothing to preserve his freedom and reputation. But I had something he didn't: the complete architectural knowledge of Genesis AI, powerful allies who believed in justice, and 37 years of experience fighting battles in rooms where I was consistently underestimated. The final confrontation was approaching, and I intended to be ready for it. David's sister's apartment was a sanctuary of modern minimalism on the 12th floor of a converted warehouse in Brooklyn Heights. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the Manhattan skyline, but David immediately pulled the blinds shut and set up a secure laptop on the glass dining table. This system is completely isolated from Technovision's networks, he explained, typing rapidly. No corporate firewalls, no monitoring software, no way for Robert's people to trace our activities. I studied his face, still uncertain of his true motivations. Why are you helping me, David? You never stood up for me during all those meetings where Robert took credit for my work. He paused, guilt flashing across his features like a shadow. Because I've been a coward, Gabriella. I knew Genesis AI was your creation. Every algorithm, every innovation, every breakthrough. I watched Robert systematically erase your contributions from presentation slides and project documentation, and I said nothing. He met my gaze directly, his voice heavy with regret. My silence made me complicit in his theft. I won't make that mistake again. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. After checking the display, his expression darkened. It's Elizabeth. Robert's escalating the situation. He answered and put the call on speaker. Elizabeth's voice filled the small apartment, tight with controlled anger. Robert has convinced the board to hold an emergency vote at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. He's claiming Gabriella has gone rogue, planted evidence against innocent executives, and represents an active threat to company security. They're voting on whether to pursue criminal charges. I felt a chill run through me, despite the apartment's warmth. How much time do we have? 16 hours, Elizabeth replied grimly. But there's more. Robert's security team traced David's cell phone to your general vicinity. You need to assume they'll find you soon. And David was already packing the laptop. We need to move. I know another safe location. Wait, I interrupted, my mind racing through our limited options. Running won't solve this. We need to go on the offensive. I turned to David. Can you establish a secure connection to Genesis AI from here? Too risky, he replied. Robert's monitoring all access points. Then we create a new one. I opened the laptop and began typing furiously. Genesis AI has a maintenance backdoor I built for emergency system recovery. It's not documented anywhere because I designed it as a failsafe for catastrophic failures. Robert doesn't know it exists. For the next several hours, I worked with the focused intensity that had made me legendary among my peers, building a secure tunnel into the system while David coordinated with Elizabeth. By midnight, we had established covert access to Genesis AI without triggering any security alerts. I'm in, I announced, feeling a surge of satisfaction as the familiar interface loaded on screen. Now I trace the money. The fraudulent transactions were cleverly disguised, but with my intimate knowledge of the system's architecture, I could see the pattern clearly. Robert had created a sophisticated algorithm that skimmed fractional percentages from thousands of legitimate transactions, routing them through a labyrinth of shell companies before consolidating them into offshore investment accounts. It was brilliant in its simplicity, stealing millions in plain sight while appearing completely legitimate to casual observation. "Remarkable," I murmured, almost impressed despite my fury. "He's been running this scheme for over 18 months, generating nearly $12 million in illegal profits." As I worked to document and reverse engineer the fraud, David received another urgent call. His face paled as he listened to the voice on the other end. "That was my contact in corporate security," he reported after hanging up. "Robert's not just pursuing criminal charges anymore. He's hired a private investigation firm to build a comprehensive case against you. They're claiming you embedded the fraudulent code deliberately as revenge for being passed over for promotion." The full scope of Robert's strategy became clear. He wasn't just trying to discredit me. He was systematically constructing a narrative that would make me the perfect scapegoat for his crimes. The angry older woman, bitter about her lack of recognition, who sabotaged the company's premier product in an act of professional spite. "How long before they trace us here?" I asked, never looking up from my screen as I continued building the case that would expose the truth. "Maybe 2 hours," David replied. 3 at most." "Then we finish this tonight." I began typing again, my fingers flying across the keyboard with desperate efficiency. "I'm going to recalibrate Genesis AI to expose every fraudulent transaction and identify all responsible parties. When I'm done, the system itself will provide irrefutable evidence of Robert's crimes." Working through the night, I meticulously reconstructed the fraud pathways, documenting each step with the precision of a forensic accountant. I created a comprehensive report that highlighted not only Robert's manipulation, but also the involvement of 3 board members who had received insider information in exchange for their support. "It's ready," I told David as dawn light began filtering through the blinds. "I'm scheduling the system to deliver this evidence to every board member, key executives, and Elizabeth's SEC contacts simultaneously at precisely 8:59 a.m., 1 minute before the vote." David's phone rang again. This time it was Elizabeth, and her voice carried urgent warning. "They've found you. Robert's security team is in the building lobby. You need to evacuate immediately." Taking, we grabbed the laptop and rushed to the emergency stairwell, hearing the elevator ascending toward our floor as we began our descent. 12 flights of stairs later, we emerged into the underground parking garage, breathless and disoriented. "My car's being monitored," David said, scanning the garage nervously. "We need another way out." A service exit led us to a back alley where the morning light was just beginning to illuminate the city streets. We hurried away from the building, trying to blend with early commuters heading to subway stations and bus stops. "It's 7:30, I noted, checking my secure phone. "The evidence will deploy automatically in 90 minutes. We just need to stay hidden until then." We found refuge in a busy train station cafe, positioning ourselves in a corner with clear sightlines to all entrances. David kept watch while I monitored the secure connection to Genesis AI, ensuring everything was proceeding according to plan. At 8:45, Elizabeth texted Robert, making his final presentation to board now. SEC agents standing by with federal warrants. "Where are you?" I replied. "Safe. Evidence deploying in 14 minutes. Be ready." The final minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. At precisely 8:59 a.m., I watched remotely as Genesis AI executed my command, sending the damning evidence to every board member, key executive, and Elizabeth's federal contacts simultaneously. My phone immediately buzzed with a message from Elizabeth. "It's working. You should see Robert's face when everyone received your report. Absolutely priceless. SEC moving in with arrest warrants. You've done it. Gabriella." Relief washed over me like a wave, followed quickly by exhaustion. After months of betrayal, days of desperate investigation, and a night of frantic coding, justice was finally unfolding in real time. But as I looked up from my phone, that moment of triumph evaporated instantly. Standing at the cafe entrance, scanning the crowded space with cold determination, was Robert himself. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his silver hair uncombed, his face haggard with desperation and rage. Our eyes met across the room, and his expression shifted from surprise to fury in an instant. In that moment, I knew the final confrontation was inevitable. Robert charged toward our table, shoving startled commuters aside in his desperation. David stood to intercept him, but Robert was faster, fueled by the rage of a cornered predator. "You think you've won," he snarled, looming over me with wild eyes. "You've destroyed everything I built, everything I worked for." I met his gaze steadily, feeling calmer than I had in months. "No, Robert, you did that yourself when you stole my work and used it to commit fraud." His hand shot forward, grabbing my arm with enough force to leave bruises. "I made you without me. You'd be nothing but a forgotten relic in an industry that values innovation over antiquated thinking. Let her go." David's voice was firm as he gripped Robert's shoulder, but Robert whirled around, his face contorted with desperation. "You too, David, after everything I've done for your career." The commotion was drawing attention, station security was approaching, and other travelers were beginning to pull out their phones to record the confrontation. "It's over, Robert," I said quietly. "The board has the evidence. The SEC has the evidence. You can't bury this." Just then, his phone rang. He fumbled for it with shaking hands, and I could hear a crisp, authoritative voice through the speaker. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Agent Sarah Coleman with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We're currently at Technovision headquarters with federal warrants. You need to return to the office immediately for questioning regarding securities fraud and market manipulation charges." Robert's hand fell limply to his side, still clutching the phone. The fight seemed to drain out of him completely, as the reality of his situation finally penetrated his desperate rage. Security officers reached us just as Robert's phone buzzed again. He glanced down at the screen, then looked up at me with genuine fear replacing the anger in his eyes. "The board," he whispered, his voice broken. "Unanimous vote for immediate termination." As the officers escorted Robert away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched him go with an unexpected mixture of relief and hollow victory. This man had tried to destroy my career, steal my legacy, and potentially send me to prison for his crimes. Yet in this moment of his complete downfall, I felt no satisfaction, only the profound exhaustion of a battle finally won. The truth had emerged, but the cost had been enormous for everyone involved. The Technovision headquarters felt like a completely different world when David and I arrived 3 hours later. Federal agents moved through the offices with methodical efficiency, securing documents and digital evidence while employees gathered in nervous clusters, whispering anxiously about the morning's dramatic events. The same building where I'd been dismissed as a replaceable cog just days earlier now buzzed with the energy of a major criminal investigation. Emma Rodriguez, the young programmer who'd warned me about Robert's security meeting, rushed up to me as I crossed the marble lobby. Her eyes were bright with admiration and relief. "Gabriella, "You did it," she exclaimed, her voice filled with the kind of respect I'd been craving for decades. "Everyone knows the truth now. Everyone knows what you created, what you accomplished. The whole company is talking about how brilliant you are." I squeezed her hand gratefully, remembering my own younger self, ambitious, idealistic, convinced that talent and hard work would inevitably be rewarded. "Thank you, Emma. Your warning probably saved my career, maybe even my freedom." The executive boardroom had been transformed since my last desperate confrontation there. Gone was the atmosphere of corporate intimidation and male dominance. Instead, I found myself welcomed by the remaining board members with a mixture of respect, embarrassment, and genuine contrition. Elizabeth Harrison stood as I entered, her expression formal but warm. "Gabriella," she began, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority, "on behalf of Technovision's board of directors, I want to extend our most sincere and profound apologies for what has transpired. Robert Mitchell's actions, both in claiming credit for your work and in his criminal financial manipulations, represent a betrayal of everything this company should stand for." The other board members nodded solemnly, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. These were people who'd built their careers on ethical business practices, and Robert's crimes had shaken their faith in their own judgment. "We've unanimously voted to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer," Elizabeth continued, "with full public recognition as the creator and architect of Genesis AI. Additionally, we're prepared to grant you the partnership stake you requested, along with comprehensive compensation for your contributions, including the bonus that was rightfully yours." It was everything I demanded, everything I deserved after years of being overlooked and undervalued. Yet as I sat there listening to their formal apology, I realized something had shifted in my perspective during this ordeal. The validation felt satisfying, but it wasn't complete. "Thank you, Elizabeth. I accept the recognition and the compensation. Both are long overdue," I replied carefully. "However, I'd like to propose an alternative to the traditional CTO position." Surprise flickered across the board members' faces. They'd expected gratitude, perhaps even relief. Instead, I was negotiating. I opened my tablet and displayed a detailed organizational chart I'd been developing during my sleepless nights of planning. "I've been thinking about what Genesis AI truly represents. It's not just software. It's a revolutionary approach to financial systems management that prioritizes transparency, accountability, and ethical decision-making." I stood and walked to the presentation screen, feeling more confident and authoritative than I had in years. "I'm proposing the creation of a new semi-autonomous division within Technovision Genesis Technologies. It would operate as an innovation lab focused specifically on ethical fintech development, with me as its founder and director." Elizabeth studied the proposal thoughtfully, her business acumen immediately recognizing the potential. "And your first hire for this new division?" I smiled, thinking of the brilliant young woman who'd risked her own career to warn me about Robert's plans. "Emma Rodriguez." She recognized the quality and integrity of my code when no one else was looking. "She represents exactly the kind of talent we need to cultivate and promote, not overlook because of age, gender, or any other irrelevant factor." The board approved my proposal unanimously within a week. I had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a substantial budget for hiring and development, and most importantly, the authority to build something meaningful from the ashes of Robert's betrayal. 3 months later, I stood before a packed auditorium in the Technovision Conference Center, preparing to unveil Genesis AI 2.0 to an audience of industry leaders, financial executives, and technology journalists. My team, now 20 strong and predominantly women who had previously been overlooked in their departments, sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride at what we'd accomplished together. A year ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. I was fighting simply for recognition of my work. Today, we're redefining what that work means for the future of ethical financial technology. The new system was more than just an upgrade. It was a paradigm shift. Genesis AI 2 didn't just manage financial transactions. It actively monitored them for ethical compliance, creating real-time transparency reports and flagging potential irregularities before they could become systemic problems. It was the antithesis of everything Robert had tried to use my original system to accomplish. As I demonstrated the new platform's capabilities, I spotted Patricia Wong in the audience, smiling approvingly. After Robert's removal and arrest, she had emerged as a powerful ally in restructuring Technovision's financial governance, ensuring that the kind of fraud Robert had perpetrated could never happen again. After the presentation, Elizabeth approached me with an industry magazine tucked under her arm. On the cover was my photograph, not hidden in a group shot or relegated to a small sidebar, but prominently featured with the headline, Gabriella Chen, the visionary who revolutionized ethical fintech at 63. Quite a change from a year ago, Elizabeth observed with a knowing smile. I nodded, thinking about how dramatically my life had transformed. Next month is my 64th birthday, I noted. Wasn't retirement supposed to be my target around this time? It was, Elizabeth acknowledged. But it seems you still have quite a few good years of innovation ahead of you. That evening, as I walked through the Genesis Technologies offices, I paused to observe Emma mentoring a new intern, a woman in her 50s who had returned to technology after raising her family. The scene filled me with profound satisfaction. Age isn't a liability, I overheard Emma telling the intern, her voice carrying the wisdom I tried to share with her. It's perspective, experience, and hard-earned wisdom. Those are assets any smart company should value. I smiled and continued to my office, where a small crystal award sat prominently on my desk. The Women in Technology Foundation had presented it to me the previous week, its inscription reading simply, "For breaking barriers and building bridges." As I settled into my chair to review the day's progress reports, my eyes fell on a small frame display on the corner of my desk, that crumpled $50 bill Robert had pressed into my palm with such contempt. I'd kept it, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a symbol of how far I'd traveled. Robert's final words to me had been completely wrong. I wasn't a relic of a bygone era. I was a pioneer, and my greatest innovation hadn't been Genesis AI. It had been proving that in the technology industry, true value isn't determined by age, gender, or the prejudices of insecure executives, but by vision, perseverance, and the courage to stand up for what you've created. The $50 bill caught the last rays of sunset streaming through my office windows. Robert had meant it as an insult, a symbol of my supposed insignificance. Instead, it had become the first page of my renaissance. 3 weeks later, I received news that Robert Mitchell had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for securities fraud, market manipulation, and conspiracy. Several of his co-conspirators among the board members received similar sentences. The justice system had worked, slowly but thoroughly. I felt no satisfaction in Robert's downfall, only relief that the truth had finally emerged and that Technovision could move forward with integrity. The company not only survived the scandal, but emerged stronger, with new leadership committed to ethical practices and transparent governance. My story became something of a legend in Silicon Valley. The 63-year-old woman who took down a corrupt CEO and transformed her stolen innovation into a force for positive change. Speaking invitations poured in from conferences around the world, and I found myself becoming an advocate for older workers in technology, especially women who had been marginalized or overlooked. But the most meaningful recognition came from the young programmers and engineers who approached me after speaking engagements, their eyes bright with determination and hope. They saw in my story proof that talent and integrity could ultimately triumph over corruption and prejudice, that age could be an asset rather than a liability, and that fighting for justice was always worth the risk. The $50 insult had indeed become something far greater than Robert Mitchell could ever have imagined. It had become the foundation of a movement toward greater equity and respect in the technology industry. And at 64, I was just getting started. 5 years later, as I celebrated my 69th birthday in the Genesis Technologies Innovation Lab, I was surrounded by 30 brilliant minds from diverse backgrounds, young graduates working alongside seasoned professionals who had thought their best years were behind them. The walls displayed patents, awards, and most importantly, photographs of the ethical financial systems we'd helped implement in companies across the globe. Emma Rodriguez, now 33, and my chosen successor as Director of Innovation, stood before our team presenting the latest breakthrough, Genesis AI 3.0, an artificial intelligence system that could predict and prevent financial crimes before they occurred. The technology that had once been weaponized for fraud was now the industry's most powerful tool for ensuring transparency and accountability. 5 years ago, our founder taught us that true innovation isn't about replacing wisdom with youth. Emma told the gathered team, her voice carrying the confidence I'd worked to nurture in her. It's about combining experience with fresh perspectives to create something neither could achieve alone. I watched from the back of the room, feeling a profound sense of completion. The young woman who had once risked her career to warn me about Robert's schemes had grown into a leader who understood that success isn't measured by how many people you climb over, but by how many you lift up along the way. That evening, at home in my study, I opened my laptop and began typing my memoir, not just the story of corporate betrayal and technical triumph, but a guide for others who might find themselves underestimated, overlooked, or written off because of their age. The title came easily, The $50 Renaissance, How One Insult Became a Movement. As I wrote, my fingers occasionally brushed against that framed $50 bill on my desk. Robert Mitchell had been released from prison 6 months earlier, a broken man who struggled to find even entry-level work in an industry that had once celebrated him. I felt no satisfaction in his fall, only gratitude that his attempt to diminish me had instead revealed my true strength. The final chapter of my story wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about transformation, proving that wisdom earned through decades of experience, combined with the courage to fight for what's right, could create positive change that rippled far beyond any individual victory. At 69, I wasn't slowing down. I was just getting started on the most meaningful chapter of my life. My dear friends, they say Gabriella's story isn't just about technology or corporate corruption. It's about something much more profound that each of us faces at different points in our lives. It's about that moment when the world tells you that your time has passed, that your experience doesn't matter, that you should step aside for someone younger, faster, or supposedly more innovative. But here's the truth that Gabriella discovered, and that I want you to carry with you today. Your greatest comeback can begin with your deepest insult. Think about it. That $50 bill wasn't just money. It was Robert's attempt to define Gabriella's worth, to make her believe she was disposable. Instead, she turned it into rocket fuel for the most significant achievements of her entire career. At 63, when society expected her to fade quietly into retirement, she built an empire of ethical innovation that changed an entire industry. How many of us have received our own $50 insults? Moments when someone dismissed our dreams, questioned our abilities, or suggested we were too old, too inexperienced, or simply not enough. Maybe it was a boss who passed you over for promotion, a family member who doubted your new venture, or even your own inner voice, whispering that your best days are behind you. But here's what Gabriella teaches us. Age isn't your expiration date. It's your competitive advantage. Every year you've lived, every challenge you've overcome, every lesson you've learned has equipped you with something that no young hotshot can replicate: wisdom earned through experience, perspective gained through hardship, and the unshakable confidence that comes from surviving and thriving through life's storms. Gabriella didn't win because she was the youngest or the loudest voice in the room. She won because she understood something her opponents didn't. That true power comes not from taking credit for other people's work, but from building something so valuable, so innovative, so fundamentally necessary that the world has no choice but to recognize your worth. I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a $50 insult moment that tried to define your worth? How did you turn that challenge into fuel for your comeback? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if Gabriella's journey inspired you to believe that your greatest achievements might still be ahead of you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because every week, we're sharing stories of people who refuse to let age, setbacks, or other people's limitations define their possibilities. Remember, you're not too old to dream big. You're not too experienced to start over. And you're definitely not too wise to show the world what real innovation looks like. Your renaissance is waiting. When will you claim it?